The faces you see on faded film tell a story from behind the walls of Native American boarding schools. Take a minute. It's tough, but you should hear it. Where do we go from here? What could be done as far as changes to policy or an apology, perhaps? What do you think would be an appropriate step forward?
Well, for the boarding school era, that's exactly what we want in a bill. Is we want to be able to get the resources to more formally explore all of the data that our federal government and these dozens of churches across the country basically need to be revealed and documented and archived, so we could get a better understanding of what the harm was. My name is Jim LaBelle. My Inupiaq name is Akpayuk, which is a name given to me in honor of an uncle who had passed away before I was born. And Akpayuk means fast runner.
Jim LaBelle confronts the brutal truth.
My ancestry on my mother's side goes to Kotzebue and Norvik, Alaska, which is above the Arctic Circle. My father came from Wisconsin, hence the last name LaBelle. He died when I was very young, so I really never got to know him or anything about his culture. And whenever he was alive, he was always working or away from the house for the most part. So he's just kind of like a distant stranger. But I know what the real reason you're wanting to chat is that I am a boarding school survivor. I spent 10 years in boarding schools from 1955 until 1965. Of course, I was born in Alaska when it was still called a territory, and it had not achieved statehood yet. In fact, I was born 12 years before statehood. So as you can imagine, the federal government had total sway up here, basically controlled all of our lives up here, and especially Alaska Native children who got caught up in that mandate of sending children to boarding school with the idea of assimilation and acculturation methodologies. And unfortunately, I think in my case that they were successful because I no longer can speak my language. I used to like to think I was bilingual, that I could speak both Inupiaq and English. And I quickly shut down speaking my Inupiaq side because I saw so many of my fellow students being severely punished for speaking only their language. And the punishment ran from slaps on the face, being forced to eat lye soap, being placed in darkened rooms, being whipped with paddles and belts, and being forced to run a gauntlet naked, so that other children were used to help enforce that by forcing them to use their belts on us as we ran up and down the gauntlet. And it wasn't only for speaking our language, but there was a lot of arbitrariness to some of the demerits that some of us children received. It could be at the whim of some matron that didn't like the idea that we were horseplaying or wrestling or maybe mouthing back, as kids do, and I know I did. But we got severely punished for that, and it it broke a lot of our spirits.
Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland.
As the federal government moved the country west, they also moved to exterminate, eradicate, and assimilate Native Americans, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians. The languages, cultures, religions, traditional practices, and even the history of Native communities, all of it was targeted for destruction.
A lot of our children were, a lot of the boys especially, you know, there's, if you can imagine every kind of abuse imaginable.
For more than a century, tens of thousands of Indigenous children were taken from their communities and forced into boarding schools run by the U.S. government, specifically the Department of the Interior and religious institutions.
There was, I would call, spiritual abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and of course, sexual abuse and physical abuse. And unfortunately, Wrangell attracted pedophiles.
The consequences of federal Indian boarding school policies, including the intergenerational trauma caused by forced family separation and cultural eradication, which were inflicted upon generations of children as young as 4 years old, are heartbreaking and undeniable.
They worked as matrons in the boys' dorm and in the girls' dorm as well. Women matrons were doing similar kinds of things to girls over there. I remember riding home when I was about 10 years old. I was trying to get my mom to read my letter because I was complaining about the abuses that we were receiving. And my mom, years later, when she remembered my letter, by the way, she was an alcoholic, so she was not always available to us emotionally in the summer times when we got home. But that one particular day, she mentioned that, oh, I got a letter from you, and I didn't understand it because a lot of what is in the letter was blacked out.
When my maternal grandparents were only 8 years old, they were stolen from their parents' culture and communities and forced to live in boarding schools until the age of 13.
That meant they were also reading our mail. They were censoring things that we were saying. You know, we've had children with parents who sent them money that never got their money. Other children wrote letters like I did and got the same reply years later. They would be told that they didn't know what was said. A lot of these matrons got away with a lot of things that today they would go to prison for themselves. They had free reign practically in the boys' dorm that I can recall. A good friend of mine, when I was about 12, we were the same age. A matron hit him so hard in the side of his face that it splayed the side of his cheeks open, and like he had one large mouth. That he was instantly unconscious. His whole entire side of his face was open and bleeding. They took him to the local hospital 5 miles away, and we didn't see him for quite a while. And when he did come back to school, he had his mouth wired shut, and he could only eat and drink through a straw. for quite a few weeks afterwards. But he was also a really he was a daily reminder that this matron could get away with anything, because that
Mhm.
matron was never fired, never admonished, never went to prison, and that just emboldened him to do more crazy things. And a lot of children paid for that in subsequent years.
Have you ever heard the phrase, kill the Indian, save the man?
Yes, I have. That came right out of uh, Colonel Henry Pratt, who I guess later became a general, Henry Pratt, who coined that term with respect to the first boarding school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in 1879. And in fact, it was written in wrought iron in this entry into the Carlisle boarding school. Kill the Indian and save the man. And he took it from another general, a Plains Indian fighter, who had said, the only good Indian I ever saw was dead. So the fact that the first boarding school in America was modeled after the military, all of the subsequent boarding schools across America were similarly designed and structured to look like the one in Carlisle, with the military-style barracks. We were ordered to march everywhere with whistles. We woke up to whistles. We went to chow, the mess hall, with a whistle. We went to classrooms to start the day with a whistle. And there was a general alarm too at the school that kind of signaled the different hours for the different classes. And then there's a lights out notice that was a very shrill siren. That was kind of like a typical day. We went to the mess hall, of course, where we had no choice but to eat Western industrial canned foods, huge industrial sized cans of salted meats, huge cans of salted vegetables, huge cans of what do you call those, sugary fruits. We drank powdered milk, powdered juice. We ate powdered eggs. And of course, there was a lot of cheese. They call commodity cheese. And that didn't play well with our native bodies, as you can imagine. We were so used to eating our traditional native foods.
Which is low in sugar.
Yes,
or no
very
sugar,
low.
no salt, particularly.
Right.
So then you
And
get loaded up with all these artificial, sweeteners and flavors and processed foods.
yeah, and well, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, a lot of us we had an extreme reaction to eating those foods. It was not unusual for many of us to throw up, to have diarrhea, to have both throwing up and diarrhea at the same time, soiling our sheets and our bedding and our clothing, and the matrons getting pissed off because we soiled our bedding and ourselves. And and we were being kind of punished for that as well. There was about between 350 and 400 children between the ages of 5 years old to about age 15 or so at Wrangell. Equally a similar number of boys to girls. Many of us coming to the school with all kinds of various illnesses and diseases that got shared around. We had influenza, we had smallpox, chickenpox, measles, mumps, that all got spread all over the dormitories. We got boils. I remember boils was, oh my God, that was so painful. And I remember getting all of the diseases that I just mentioned. And the measles were really one of the hard ones to overcome because of sensitivity to light. They had to keep us in a darkened room. I could barely stand any kind of daylight or sunlight or artificial light. So it went through our dormitories in waves, and I don't know that the little clinic that was on campus was sufficient to really care for all of us. I remember getting pneumonia and ending up in the bed in the clinic for almost 2 weeks. I remember other children disappearing. They just didn't. One day they were there, and another day they were gone, and we were never allowed to ask any questions about where they went and why are they no longer with us. And we can only speculate, looking back, that there was a whole variety of reasons they could have, left. Some of them died, I suppose, in the 6 years I was there. It's hard to imagine no child die or not dying during that time period. But we could never. There's no way of knowing where the cemetery is on this particular campus. There is kind of a native burial site between Wrangell Institute and the town of Wrangell, and the institute itself was 5 miles away from the town. It had two very imposing not military style signs almost. Is it attention, U.S. government property, no unauthorized people allowed. So that sent a very strong message to, not to go there.